Realize, like several other pieces of this rubric, that there are two pieces here, two requirements to get the full 3.5, or the 3 points, excuse me. So briefly describe the 3 greatest accomplishments or findings in this award area. 3 points. To get the first half of those, clearly identify 3 accomplishments related to the award area. So 3, all related to this award area. The second half of those points, that those accomplishments illustrate significant impact to the growth and success of the SAE. So do I have 3 accomplishments that are related to this category? If I've applied in veterinary science, are all 3 of my accomplishments related to that category? Some great accomplishments that a student might have, that are wonderful things that will fit well on the resume, but not necessarily here, to be cautious of with your students. Keep them SAE related to this category. So if I became chapter president, if I ran for chapter office twice, never got elected, but by my junior year, I finally got elected and I'm our chapter president, that's a great accomplishment. Probably not related to their veterinary science SAE, okay? Not related to their livestock SAE, their turf grass management SAE. If they single-handedly put together a chapter-wide community service program that raised lots of money for a local entity, or lots of coats and food for people in need, that's tremendous. That is a wonderful thing. Probably doesn't fit in that specific proficiency award category unless it's the service learning piece. So if they've been named class valedictorian, that's a great thing. That's a great thing. But doesn't necessarily fit in their ag communications or ag education or poultry production or any other SAE specifically. So make sure that they're related to the SAE, and then that they show specific significant impact on the growth. So if I list an accomplishment that I received and earned my pesticide license, that's great. Some work went into that. It was related to the SAE. Then tell me how that's going to make my SAE better. Okay. If I began some of these categories, you can begin in placement, move to entrepreneurship, and include that in the same application. And if I began by working for my uncle or aunt or cousin's lawn care business, landscape business, but by year 3 I had saved enough money and bought my own lawnmowers, hired a couple of my friends, and now I was doing my own landscaping business where I'm an entrepreneur, not in placement. Saving that money to purchase my own zero-turn lawnmower or 2 and hire somebody to expand my business, that may well work in that category. So I would encourage you to make sure you have 3 that are specifically related to this area and that show significant impact on the growth of the SAE. I want to stop and see if there's any questions. That sounds really simple and obvious, and it is, but you have to be intentional. So are there any questions about that piece? Anything that you dealt with that you've tried in the past that maybe you got feedback on that you didn't understand, or any reason this is not clear?
Ben, I have a question. This is Miss Webb.
Yep.
If a student is working with a placement project and you're listing those accomplishments there, should those accomplishments be specific to the individual student or maybe to the placement production as a whole? Like example, poultry placement. If one of the accomplishments is reduction in mortality in birds, that's not necessarily student specific, but more operation specific. Would that be an acceptable piece to put there?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. If the student had a hand in that, absolutely. If you want to show that the operation I work for showed this improvement, be it in mortality rate, whatever it may be, if you can show that the student was engaged in that. Now, if it's not fair for them to take full credit for it, don't do that. If you're going to put it down and whoever reads that may think, okay, there's no way that one 17-year-old student was responsible for all of that. So be fair and authentic with the answer. But if the student had a say in that or had a hand in it, Absolutely. If I work on that poultry operation and my skills the first few years are pretty basic, and to be honest, I probably didn't have a whole lot to do with increasing that factor. Maybe I don't list that and just brag on the farm, because this is about the student's application. It's not about the operation as a whole. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
But that's a great question. You are asking about the student's development and their accomplishments, not just the accomplishments of the operation. If you work for a placement or work in a placement. Any other questions or thoughts on accomplishments? I would encourage you to be as specific as you can and show growth. There are several opportunities, without being completely repetitive, to really verify the development of what that student shows that they're capable of doing. You can explain in an essay answer here or there, but if you continue to give examples and be specific of how a student developed certain skills and abilities with different examples, that's only going to help solidify with those judges that student is accountable for that. Any other questions on the accomplishments piece? Okay. I think the next one is impacts. Is that correct, Brandon? Yeah. 3 ways your experiences or opportunities in this award area will impact your future. Clearly describe 3 experiences from the SAE or activities that will impact the candidate's future. You know, this is clear, but answer both parts of the question. What are 3 pieces or experiences from this SAE? Not from high school in general, not from FFA in general, from this SAE that will impact your future. You know, maybe the student's not going to, maybe they're not going to maintain as a career a landscaping business. So maybe you stop short of saying learning how to sharpen my own lawnmower blades is going to make me better in whatever career. But I bet they probably did learn that if they sharpen their own lawnmower blades and service their own equipment, that they're not spending money on that. That's more money staying in their operation, whatever industry they go into later, whatever career they go into later. That independence, that self-reliance, and that financial management is going to be helpful, be it a family, be it a work. If there's something that you can afford to do yourself and learn to do it correctly, you're only saving that money to put to another part of your operation. That's the kind of things that we're talking about. Now, maybe they are going to go into that as a field. Maybe they want to go and become a doctor, a veterinarian, and learning how to give their own vaccinations, that kind of thing, is going to be something that's going to assist them. And you certainly specifically list that. These can be too generic. You know, again, time management's important. Work ethic is important. If you're going to share those, I would have a real specific example to help yourself stand out and not just be too generic with those phrases. So what are some experiences that you've had that are going to make sure? Okay, we got something here in the chat. Difference between the student's accomplishments and the student's impacts. So an accomplishment that we covered earlier was something that the student did in the short term that's going to make that particular SAE better. These impacts, we're asking the student to look big picture, whatever career they may choose. And some of them may bleed over. One of my accomplishments by becoming certified in some application of pesticides or some other certification that I received may help me future-wise in a career. But where these are separate, an accomplishment that's going to help that SAE right then, something that your SAE did for you, that's going to help you in your future. Okay, writing is a tremendous skill. Use of social media now, marketing are tremendous skills. That's where our world seems to be headed. And so if I learned photography, if I learned online marketing, if I learned that type of skill here, then I certainly think that's fair throughout this SAE. And maybe whatever your SAE responsibilities were, that was a small part of it. But if you've learned that skill and know that it's going to help you in a future career, that is an impact on your future. So there is a difference in those impacts and in those accomplishments. They can be similar, but understand the direction that the application is asking you to take. Don't stop and see if there's any immediate questions with that piece.
So yeah, we get that question occasionally, and I think what is important to note too is don't just copy and paste one or two of those from the accomplishment to the impact. If you do use something that's very similar, then elaborate on how it's going to affect your future, because that's where I see points lost in that area as far as the impacts.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it seem like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. We're asking you throughout to be consistent and tell the same story. But don't be so repetitive that you waste space that is given to you. If you say the exact same things on every page, yes, you're reassuring the judges it's right. You're also giving away space to tell the whole story. So I would encourage you to not just cut and paste and use the exact same things. Tell the whole story. If you get to the end and think, man, I used every ounce of white space available, and we still didn't even get to talk about the favorite part when they do this, well, then we've got to find a way to do that. Be it in the skills and the impacts, in the story somewhere, in a photo caption. There are plenty of opportunities to share every piece of this story in the teacher's letter. If you use that as your, if you use the teacher's letter later as your supporting document, there are ways to cover every piece. So what the student truly does, make sure that you tell the whole story and use every ounce of space. Don't just replicate and think, well, they've already asked me this, I'll put the exact same thing. Places that need to mirror one another and justify or verify, not justify, verify, that's good. But don't just copy and paste the same things over and over because you're missing opportunity.
So I think in writing this one, because a lot of times this one's written and it's not very clear. And so a strategy into writing to this prompt is if you take a piece of paper and fold it in half. And on one side, you're going to put say the positive traits versus the negative traits. You're going to make your list of positive traits or negative traits. So you do that in sometimes, and you're trying to get clarity on something. If you were to take a piece of paper and you would have them write the experience on one side, experience is something that you've done, okay? So something that they've done within the project that was a cool experience. Then on the other side of the paper, you have them write, how it's going to affect their future, okay? The experience on one side, the other side, have them write how it's going to affect their future. And that helps the clarity of the student focus on what it is, what's the effect going to be in the future. And so when they write it into the application, that's the way it should be written, because you need to write it to the prompt. And the prompt, number one, asks what the experience is. And then secondly, it asks what the impact is, okay? So it's clear to the reader when they read through this that they're answering the prompt very directly, okay? And then you can capitalize the word, the experience. You can capitalize the word impact if you want to draw the attention to both aspects to get the full points of the scoring. So be strategic on the way that you approach the writing to gather all the points possible. And so it helps you become more clear on both sides, the experience and the impact to the answer to this prompt. So that's kind of how I approach it when I tell teachers how to write this, to write the answers. Number one, write the experience. What's the experience? Now tell me how it's going to affect the future. That experience, how it's going to affect the future.
We had a good question in the chat box from Shelley Williams. Are you calling accomplishments experiences? They can be, but they're not the exact same thing. Okay, so accomplishments are something that the student has experienced. These are not the same. They're not the same reference. And when you get to the impacts, and it says, what are 3 ways your experiences or opportunities will impact your future? That is unique to the accomplishments that you listed early. Maybe the accomplishment was getting that certification, whether it's pesticide application or some other type of certification that you earn. Maybe that is the accomplishment, and you tell why that made your SAE better. The experience was applying whatever that chemical or product was, and how it continued to make, how it's going to shape you when you go into some type of career, the responsibility, the work ethic involved in that. It depends on what you're doing. But those words are not interchangeable. An accomplishment is something specific the student earned. The experience is much more broad, everything that they've been a part of. And maybe the experience was some type of a failure. Maybe it was something where you learned why those animals died, and that you need to feed differently the next time if you want both the mother and the offspring to survive, if you want weaning weights to be different. So it doesn't always have to be that everything was perfect. It can be an experience that you had that's going to help you be a better producer later if you stay in that field. I want to using this piece, jump ahead just a little bit. So this afternoon, you're going to talk through skills, competencies, and knowledge. And it can look really confusing when you look at accomplishments earlier from the previous slide, impacts here, and then skills, competencies, and knowledge. Each of those, you're given an opportunity to identify some specific things the student has been a part of, experiences they've had, skills they've developed, and then discuss the impact on the SAE. Some of that can be similar and can be repeated, but it's not a copy and paste experience. It's not where you just take the exact same thing and put it the exact same way in each of those scenarios. That's not going to look as genuine and authentic to the judges. And there I hope are more experiences the student has had than just to repeat those same ones over and over. So this afternoon, as you get into the skills, competencies, and knowledge, where you identify the 10 skills, that's something that those are specific things the student has learned how to do. And with that, you've also got to share specifically how that's made the SAE better. Back here, in the part we just discussed, you asked for 3 accomplishments, not the specific skills. Some of it can be, I developed a skill. You got to list 10 skills later. So help the student think ahead and put each item where it actually belongs. If you're really excited to be able to say, I know how to ear notch pigs correctly, and that's something I do every day. That's a skill that I'm going to list in the skill section and show how it's made my SAE better. What's an accomplishment? You only have to list 3. That's not very many. You get to list 10 skills. You only have to list 3. So what are 3 accomplishments achieved? Maybe you had been raising some of your own animals and getting people to buy from you, and eventually one of your animals that you raised and made genetic decisions on brought a much higher price or earned some level of achievement, and it was based on the genetics that student designed. That's an accomplishment. Your daily feed rationing and understanding feed mixing and what to feed and protein percentages, that's probably belongs in a skill later in the application. So help the student think through all of that. Maybe look at the entire application before you really get started writing and understand where pieces are going to fit so that you verify without replicating and wasting some space. Questions about any of those pieces? I want to discuss one other thing before I yield my time.